Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Today is Friday, May the 10th. I got another great show planned for you guys today. We'll be starting off with Terrell Owens and what he had to say about the 49ers and how they're handling their star duo at wide receiver in Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel. Then we're going to be talking about the Lions general manager and how the progression is going with Jared Goff's contract thus far in the offseason now after the draft. Plus, we're going to be talking also about the reasons behind the Philadelphia Eagles collapse in the second half of the season last year. There was a lot of confusion, a lot of moving pieces. We're going to get into all of that and what one of their current players had to say about those reasons. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And if you have any questions or comments throughout today's show, please remember to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, gsmcpodcast.net. By using this link, I can see your questions on my screen, I can read them on air, and get your guys' perspective on the topic at hand or anything I say about the topic. It's a lot more engaging, and it's also a massive help for the show. So please, if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net. With that being said, I can jump back into the first segment, like I mentioned, on Terrell Owens, recently talking about his former team, the San Francisco 49ers, and specifically about their two wide receivers, Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel. A lot has been said about them and their contracts and how they were used in the Super Bowl and in trade talks, their contracts specifically with Brandon Aiyuk. That is all really clouding over the 49ers organization, and Terrell Owens appeared on 95.7 The Game's The Morning Roast recently to talk about the two wide receivers. And we'll start off with what he had to say about the idea around the Super Bowl, how they were used. That was a big topic of conversation back when the Super Bowl happened, afterwards, at how the 49ers might have misused their wide receivers, how talented that team is. You can't blame them, so to say, but at the same time, you have these two great weapons. You would think that they would have a major impact in your game plan and how the game turned out, and their lack of doing that really didn't sit well with Terrell Owens. He said, those guys have the prerogative to feel the way they feel, given why they're there, given opportunities that they probably didn't have going into the Super Bowl. And if you remember back in the game against the Kansas City Chiefs, Brandon Aiyuk finished with 3 receptions for 49 yards, and Deebo also finished with 3 receptions for 33 yards. But as a disclaimer, Deebo left a majority of the game for an injury. He got hurt, I want to say, in the third quarter, and then he missed a good part of the third quarter, and then he eventually returned. But that also plays into why he didn't get probably as many looks as he did. But also with Brandon Aiyuk, had a breakout season last year. Deebo, one of the best receivers in the league. I know the Kansas City Chiefs defense is very good, and that also has to do with a major part in all of this game planning and how it actually turns out. But 3 receptions, I didn't see the amount of targets that they got. A lot of the time they were running it. If you remember in the first half, Christian McCaffrey was looking very good and having a very good first half. And then it sort of switched. It seems like they tried to get the receivers more involved to start the second half, and that didn't turn out well. They went 3 possessions, I want to say, if I remember correctly, that they went 3 and out. So that really threw everything into a loop, plus the injury to Dre Greenlaw, and the Kansas City Chiefs got momentum that way. Then obviously they go on to win it. And now people, in hindsight, will go back to that Super Bowl and think, oh, wow, they had to have used their wide receivers a lot more. Terrell Owens certainly thinks so. That's one issue that he saw with the 49ers, but also more in depth is how they're being treated by the 49ers around these potential rumored trade talks, more so closer to the draft and leading up to it. And during the first and second rounds, there was a lot of talk about the 49ers thinking of trading Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel. He just popped up most recently, Deebo Samuel, around these trade talks, and just really being unexpected without a heads up, it seems, for Deebo and for Brandon Aiyuk. And also that didn't really sit well with Terrell Owens, given that he sort of can go back to his situation with the 49ers and kind of relate to what is going on right here with Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel. For context, back in 2004 when Terrell Owens was on the 49ers, he also was dealing with these trade rumors. He voiced his issues with the 49ers trying to trade him to the Baltimore Ravens without a heads up. Terrell Owens was a free agent that year. He wanted to sign with the Philadelphia Eagles, but the 49ers claimed that his agent didn't meet the deadline to void the final years of his contract. So technically, the 49ers believe that they still had the rights to trade him to whoever benefited them the most. Because of that, Terrell Owens filed a grievance against the 49ers. The three of them settled finally after the whole situation was resolved, and Terrell Owens got to finally sign with the Philadelphia Eagles, and the rest is history after that. He has a good amount of success with the Eagles, but with him being able to relate a little bit to that situation, now this pops up with the 49ers again with their wide receivers, and he says, "Look what happened to me in 2004. They traded me without even consulting or giving me any kinds of heads up." That sparked a lot of bad feelings with the 49ers. It didn't really end up well. And now Deebo and Brandon haven't been as publicly disgruntled with the 49ers like Terrell Owens might have been back in 2004. The only thing that has sort of gotten to that level, if you want to say, Brandon Aiyuk going on his Instagram story and putting some pretty cryptic messages out there, which have left a lot of people room to interpret them however you want to interpret them. Terrell Owens was a lot more direct. And Brandon Aiyuk, like most of the generation now, uses social media for these sort of avenues to vent out their displeasure or how they're feeling. They don't have to be so direct with it. People can interpret it however they want. But really, Brandon and his agent somewhat have been more active in the public, talking about the contract situations. Still not really resolved. John Lynch, the 49ers general manager, has said it's all going well, that they're having constant communication. But if you talk to Brandon Aiyuk, it seems like nothing is really being done to his level of expectation to feel pretty confident that a deal can get done. This has been going on pretty much all offseason since the start of March, with free agency and all of that. Then after the draft, I thought he was going to get dealt at the NFL draft, just because if a deal really isn't hashed out by then, by 2 weeks ago now, when would it be solved? If they really, really wanted to get it done, why wait this much longer? You have to figure out all the details, how the market shapes out for the wide receivers, and how beneficial it will be for the 49ers to get it done as soon as possible. The more they wait, I just don't see it benefiting them. The more they wait, another wide receiver might sign, driving up the price even more. So the 49ers have to weigh in on all of that. And just on the Terrell Owens comments and how my reaction is to them on the Super Bowl topic, I sort of agree with him. 3 receptions isn't really enough for Deebo and Brandon, but at the same time, if you really go back and look at the game, you look at how the 49ers come out, they're trying to run the ball to establish some sort of tempo, some sort of dominance in the first half. They do a great job of doing that. They were shutting down the Chiefs in the first half. Their defense was playing great. Their offense was rolling, and then it all just flipped on its head in the second half because I think they went away from that, trying to get the receivers more involved. They overdid it, and that pretty much almost cost them the Super Bowl. I don't like saying it directly did because a football game is 60 minutes, and there's a lot of plays that happen throughout the duration of the game. You don't want to say that one thing decided it unless it's a missed call, a refereeing issue, or just something towards the end of the game. If the 49ers could have won this game, I feel like they could have done a better job of coming out of that first half and trying to continue with the run game and then try and involve their wide receivers a bit more. I think they did it too early and it just threw everything off. But on the trade rumors and how it relates to Terrell Owens and just his whole point around that, I can see some of the resemblance there with him and why he would feel a certain type of way about it. But I think in just this day and age, receivers, athletes are more indirect about it. They like to keep to themselves. They won't go out publicly and say it. And if something is brewing, we will hear about it. But for now, his comments on it, he can feel however he wants. It seems like the 49ers are pretty convinced that they don't want to trade him. Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network reported that the 49ers, moving forward, are feeling that moving forward with Brandon Aiyuk is in their best interest. They don't want to trade him. They've said that over and over. So they're going to try for a deal, but again, the longer they wait, I don't see it really benefiting them. We'll see if they end up dealing Brandon, Deebo. I don't think both, but who knows? That's something interesting to follow. I'm sure it's going to carry over, but we'll see how it all ends up at the end of the day. But in the meantime, we will move on with the rest of the show. We're going to go into a quick break right now, and on the other side of that, more on the Lions general manager addressing Jared Goff's extension, how it's going, and what they're thinking about it as it gets closer and closer. I mentioned Kenneth Gainwell talking about the Philadelphia Eagles collapse last season and how he interprets it, why that happened, and also more on the 49ers, their star linebacker Dre Greenlaw, talking about his Achilles injury in the Super Bowl and how, if he didn't get injured, how he could have helped in that rest of the game. Stay tuned to all of those topics. We'll be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't need shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back now to the show, and moving into that second topic on the Detroit Lions and how they're handling Jared Goff's extension. When could we expect something to get done? The Lions have been pretty active this free agency and just in this offseason in general, not really having to deal too much with trying to get that much better. A lot of their rosters coming back, a lot of their offense and defense is going to look very similar to what it did last year, but they had to iron out some things like the extension to some pretty important players to their roster: Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, and of course Jared Goff. They were able to extend Amon-Ra St. Brown, giving him that massive 4-year contract to make him one of the highest paid receivers in the NFL. They also handed out a extension to their right tackle, Penei Sewell, to make him the highest paid offensive lineman in the NFL. And now you get to Jared Goff, really the last piece of their or the last item on their checklist to complete this offseason, because in my opinion, I think they've done a great job of addressing everything that they have to, getting better or replacing the one or two players that they lost this offseason. They've done all of that. Now all they have to do is figure out the most important position on their team, the quarterback, Jared Goff, and addressing really that situation. They were able to touch on the defensive back room that they needed with the loss of Cam Sutton. They added Carlton Davis. They drafted Terrion Arnold and Rakestraw in the second round. So to me, they did a lot to address that. That was one of the biggest needs and holes on their team. I was a big fan of how they did that. Now you get to the quarterbacks, and CBS Sports' Jonathan Jones reported back in January how both parties, both Jared Goff and the Detroit Lions, are very interested in an extension, in Jones's words. But you think about that in January, now it's 4 or 5 months later in the month of May, and nothing really has gotten done. But their general manager, Brad Holmes, has talked about the negotiations in a recent interview with WXYT 97.1 FM, in which he said, first and foremost, he's earned an extension. It's important, it's a high priority for us, and both sides are working really, really hard, and these things just take time. On that topic, on earning it, that's the first thing he said. That's the first thing he wanted to emphasize in his entire statement and his entire interview, that Jared Goff has certainly earned it, because you think back to that trade and how Jared Goff got here, how this whole team managed to form over the last couple of years and turn into one of the top contenders in the NFC. You look back at that trade, a lot of people would have said that Jared Goff, being traded to the Lions, that's it for him. The Lions aren't going anywhere anytime soon. This is just a lost cause. It doesn't matter. Jared Goff will be irrelevant in the next 3 to 4 years. But the complete opposite happens. He has helped the Lions win their first NFC North division title for the first time since 1993. They made their first playoff game and appeared in their first playoff game since 1991. They tied the franchise record for 12 wins, and they set the record for the most 30-point games with 9 games of 30 points or more this past season. So Goff and the Lions as well, all the talent around him, have certainly helped change the narrative around the Detroit Lions. They're not looked as just one of the teams just in the NFC. They're an easy game. They're not really to be taken seriously. Now that has really flipped on its head, and Jared Goff has helped them reach these goals, these landmarks of their organization, but also himself. This past year had a career-high 67.3 completion percentage, threw for over 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. So at 29 years old, you're looking at Jared Goff, and this was a big moment to show the rest of the NFL and the Lions that he really does deserve an extension, that the Lions should want to keep him, and a lot of their success is entailed to Jared Goff. They have to keep him around, and that's something they're working towards. But also, like Brad Holmes says, these sort of things take time. And it was interesting more on how he elaborated it further in his interview when he said the whole process of budgeting and preparation and all of that kind of goes into it. We've been preparing for a while now. And look, in a perfect world, we'd have had all 3 of them done, bang, bang, bang. But these things just kind of take a while, especially with the quarterback market. But I have faith that it's going to get done. That's what Brad Holmes said to really end that interview. And there's a few things that I found pretty interesting from that whole statement that he said. The process of budgeting and preparing for this extension, a lot of teams do it well, and a lot of teams do it very poorly. I won't name names, but how the Lions have really dealt with this extension, and you look at the 3 players that they're trying to extend and that they feel confident in doing so. Penei Sewell, highest paid in the NFL. You look at Amon-Ra St. Brown, also one of the highest paid receivers in the NFL, and now Jared Goff with another extension probably is going to get north of $40 million, $45 million in an extension for potentially 3-4 more years. He's only 29 years old. So the way that they've done it, they've handled that very well. And I think it's a refreshing sight to see teams acknowledge it and sort of give themselves a pat on the back, because not a lot of teams can do it well and are thrown into this conversation of, do you get rid of this player or do you get rid of another one? Can you afford to keep all of them? How does that affect the rest of your team? All those things pop up to organizations that don't really plan it out very well. And the Detroit Lions, all credit to them for really planning this out appropriately to have a competitive team for consecutive seasons. That's the one thing. And also, he said he would have liked to have done all 3, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, and Jared Goff, back to back to back. But he mentioned the quarterback market and how really crazy it is. The highest paid quarterback in the NFL on an average annual salary is Joe Burrow at $55 million. Then around him, I don't know the order, but I'm pretty sure it's Lamar, Justin Herbert, these sort of guys that are up there, rightly so, with how important they are with their to their team, and just how reliant on them and their skill set and their just talent their teams are to succeed in the NFL. Jared Goff might not be to the level of those guys and how impactful he is. With Lamar, just as an example, the whole game plan, the whole system really runs off of him and his running ability, doing options, read options, throwing short routes, getting him on the run as well, getting the running game going. That's all revolving around Lamar's skill set and just changing the game plan to fit him as best as they can. That's another organization that has done it well, planning this entire thing out, which is why they're so successful. The Lions trying to get this extension done. It pops up the question of when they get it done, or not how they get it done, but how much money they give to Jared Goff, because Brad Holmes is very knowledgeable of the quarterback market, knowing how up and down and just how much it could change from one day to the other. They're waiting on a few extensions. There's a few pending ones out there. If you think about Dak, Brock Purdy, Trevor Lawrence down the line, Jordan Love as well. Some of these quarterbacks, most specifically Dak, who is on the last year of his deal, do you wait for some of them to sort of test out the market to see how it all plays out? You kind of have an idea right now, but you don't know where it's going to trend and fall with the next line of quarterbacks trying to get paid. Do you try and jump all those guys and get it done as early as possible to try and overpaying Jared Goff if he sees that all these other guys are getting a lot more money? Afterwards, do you have to pay him more now because of that? I tend to side with paying him as early as possible just to get it out of the way, and also it is cheaper. That's also better, and it creates a lot more salary cap if you get the extension done further down the line. So that's how I would approach it. The Lions feel pretty confident about it. I think they'll get it done with Jared Goff and how important he has been to their preparation, to their success. You look at that division. We actually touched on this a little bit this morning when I appeared on the GSMC football podcast with Kenneth and Emran. We talked about the NFC North a little bit and ranked it and just gave some reasonings why we ranked the teams the way that we did. And in talking a bit about the Detroit Lions, I had them as the number one team in that division. And looking at them and just the rest of the NFC North, the Lions, talent-wise, I think they could stack up with anyone in there. But also quarterback-wise, which is what we're talking about here, Jared Goff, very experienced, has been a starter in a couple of teams now, the Lions and the Rams. You have that experience. You have him at 29 years old, a very seasoned veteran. He knows what he's doing. He knows everything, his routines, the playbook, everything that you would want in a starting quarterback. And then you look at the Vikings, potential rookie quarterback. The Bears, rookie quarterback. The Green Bay Packers have Jordan Love, who has been in the NFL for a while now, but he just had his first full season of being a starter and the guy there for the Green Bay Packers. So quarterback-wise, if you're thinking about it on raw, natural talent, Jared Goff might not be the guy you pick first, but in terms of being in the big games, having gone through that season, the trials and tribulations of it, having struggled in Los Angeles and now sort of reinventing himself here with the Detroit Lions, he's done it all. He's seen a lot of things, and that, I think, gives them an edge. You want to keep that guy around. He's a very beneficial person, quarterback, obviously, but just leader of that team to have around. He really makes this offense go, and I think him, with the job Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes have done, they're really in the beginning of a pretty extended run that they could have here with the youth of Amon-Ra St. Brown. Their offensive line is great. Just nailing down Jared Goff, like I mentioned before, he's only 29 years old. If you could keep him around for the next 3 to 4 years, that's a great window now where the Lions have a great chance to compete with the 49ers, the Eagles, anybody else in the NFC to try and make a run at the Super Bowl. You could argue that they could have been in the Super Bowl last year if it wasn't for that inexperience, but now they have that under their belt. If they can get Jared Goff done this offseason, I think it'll put everything away and give them the best chance to get back to that NFC Championship game, but this time have it end in a different way that benefits them, gets them to their to a Super Bowl appearance, and heck, maybe even win it at the end of the day. But that's a long time away. not enough time to talk about the season and the next Super Bowl. So we're going to take a pause here in the action and move on. The second break of the show is coming up, and further down the line, more on the Philadelphia Eagles collapse late in the season last year. We're going to talk about that. I mentioned Dre Greenlaw and his injury, how he thinks he could have been beneficial in that second half of the Super Bowl. Stay tuned why. And also how a unorthodox method of choosing a draft pick came up recently with the Detroit Lions and the Las Vegas Raiders. Stay tuned to find out more on that topic. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Keeping the action rolling here, diving into our next segment about the Philadelphia Eagles staying in the NFC. A lot has been said about their season. I've mentioned it before on this show. A great start to the season last year. They were 10-1 at one point, and then to end it, they really collapsed. Specifically, talking about them, the Eagles, not the sort of records you want to set. They became the first team since the 1986 New York Jets to start a season 10-1 and then finish with 5 or more losses and not win their division. Very just unbelievable to think about. If you would have told me that at 10-1, sitting at 10-1, top of the NFC, top of their division, that none of those things were going to happen and that they wouldn't have that first round bye, I think 95% of people would have said that you're crazy or you have no idea what you're talking about. But, that's what ended up happening. The Eagles, not very fortunate in how they finished their season. They lost the last 6 out of the 7 games to close out the year, wrapping it all up with that loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the first round of the playoffs. Then this offseason turned into a pretty crucial one for the Eagles with how much success that they had in that Super Bowl year, and then to follow it up with a very disappointing and just devastating way to end it all, to finish off the career of Jason Kelce also like that, and just have this sort of change now in the organization. It left a lot of bad taste in people's mouths, and following the loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they got rid of their offensive coordinator, Brian Johnson, and also their defensive coordinator, Sean Desai. A lot of, heat fell on those two guys. To some was merited just because, they're inexperienced guys. People don't know too much about them, so it's easy to just pick on those guys and say that it was because of the inexperience, it was because they don't really know what they're doing in some people's minds. I thought they did a lot better than people would give them credit for, but at the end of the day, when you have a season like that, you have those results there towards the end of the year with the talent that the Philadelphia Eagles have, consequences have to follow those sort of results, and that unfortunately is what happened to these guys. But that might not be the whole story. One of their running backs, Kenneth Gainwell, recently was on the Havian University podcast, and he sort of gave some reasons as to why he believes the collapse happened in the second half of the year. He said on that interview that, "I think it was a connection piece. Teams like the Chiefs are well connected, upstairs and downstairs, front office and locker room. When you have a connection, everything just clicks. But when you've got guys that aren't talking to each other, you never know what's going on." And that's a pretty accurate statement in just my evaluation of watching a good amount of Eagles games. just because they're a good team, but also I have some buddies that are Eagles fans, so I did catch myself watching a lot of their games. With the talent that they have, yeah, I got them over the line a few times. There was a few close games in there where you saw some iffy plays, but they got the result, and that's really what it all boils down to. But you saw it in some glimpses where Jalen and the wide receivers might not have been on the same page. A bad throw is thrown somewhere where it wasn't supposed to, or the receiver is expecting it somewhere else, and then you have Jalen and the receiver looking at each other like each of them has four heads, and nobody really knows what to do in that moment. It looks pretty bad when the quarterback and the wide receiver don't fall on the same page and know what the other one is going to do, or just know how that play is supposed to turn out. And also, you saw some false starts. The efficiency really in the red zone was a major talking point with the Eagles not being on the same page. On Kenneth Gainwell's point, not being on the same page, not having that synergy from offensive linemen to receivers to running backs to quarterback, not having that all, it really costs you in the red zone, because if you just think about it, it makes sense. There's less room to sort of move around, to maneuver in there, extend plays, and create something if a play breaks down. If everybody doesn't know the cadence, the play, if they all don't fall and move to the same rhythm, especially in the red zone, it falls short, and a lot of times they just had to settle for field goals. And if their defense wasn't standing up to them and complementing that offensive drive, they got outscored a lot of the times, and they just weren't able to keep up with other offenses, mostly in the playoffs, because everybody in the playoffs is good, obviously, so that comes at a higher cost when you get later in the year. And miscues on defense as well, just talking about it. Again, not having that connection like Kenneth Gainwell says. You see some defensive backs thinking the other guy's going to cover their man. They think they're going to switch. One guy doesn't switch. One guy stays low. And then you have a wide open receiver down the field, and everybody's looking around like who was supposed to cover that guy. If the zones aren't working, it could leave massive gaps in their defense. So it was a lot of stuff like that. Not being able to stop the run also didn't help out at all. All that sort of stuff kind of shows you why Kenneth Gainwell is right. How much of that can you put on the coach? At the end of the day, the coaches will give a play that they think will work. A lot of the times, obviously, it doesn't. It's a bad play. But if it's miscues like this, the false starts, some guy not really paying attention, or the whole team not really paying attention and knowing what they're supposed to do, it looks pretty sloppy, and that would be how I would describe the Eagles to end the year. Very sloppy play, and just not accustomed to seeing this out of them. And then, because of these changes, they bring in Kellen Moore, Vic Fangio on the defensive side of the ball to lead these sides, the offense and the defense. And plus, they just brought in more talent and more guys that they felt could help them out. Saquon Barkley, Bryce Huff. They brought back C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They drafted Cooper DeJean, Quinyon Mitchell, and they also brought in Devin White as well on the defensive side of the ball. So on top of just these miscues and the connection that Kenneth Gainwell says, they just brought in more talent, and I think they needed that on the defensive side of the ball, not the offensive side of the ball, but they brought in Saquon Barkley to really round out that group. On the defensive side, I had a lot of gripe with their linebackers. They just didn't fit the bill for the Eagles. I thought they expected more talent there, more production out of that group. The defensive line was great. They got a lot out of Jalen Carter. Even with Brandon Graham and Fletcher Cox there, older players, they were still able to contribute. They traded Hassan Reddick, but he wasn't really too much of the problem. You go to the secondary, the safety play wasn't great. Reed Blankenship did pretty well. They also had, I want to say, Terrell Edmonds back there, and Kevin Byard at one point as well. That experiment, that addition didn't really work out well for them. You had a lot of just bad plays in the secondary, and also James Bradbury had a very rough season coverage-wise, and just overall play. He took a lot of the heat as well. So they bring in younger guys, more guys that are talented, like the players that they have, but also that have proven that they are good players in this league. I think they needed that. I like those additions for them. And just on this topic of the miscues again, because it is interesting how Kenneth Gainwell put it in his statement. You look at the miscues and people not being on the same page. That sort of points out to me and probably to some other people as well a lack of leadership, you want to say, or a lack of just really reassuring all these fine details and just having someone there to make sure everyone's on the same page. Of course, a lot of that responsibility falls on the quarterback, so you could look at Jalen Hurts, but also a lot of people looked at Nick Sirianni and how capable he really was to be the head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles. It would have been a major change and a major process to look for another head coach. Not to say that I don't think Nick Sirianni deserves to be fired, but I do also kind of tilt my head a little bit and squint to look at Nick Sirianni. Yeah, maybe is he the coach? I don't know. I have my doubts as well. Maturity has been a topic brought up with him as well, how mature he is to really handle this job. But he stayed around. But now it also does turn into a bit more of a pressured situation because of all the guys that you brought in, because you already got rid of the coordinators. The only guy that's still left over is Jalen Hurts and Nick Sirianni. You extended your receivers already, everyone on the offensive line. You're not going to get rid of them. So it's either all going to fall on Nick Sirianni or Jalen Hurts. I doubt they move on from Jalen Hurts. So if they underperform again this year with adding a guy like Saquon Barkley to that division, everybody has them as the favorites. The guy that they're going to look to is unfortunately going to be Nick Sirianni. So there is more pressure now on Sirianni to get this all done. I like the moves that they've made. How good can they be now, and how can they rebound off of this? I mentioned people will have them as the favorites now, rightly so. I think they're going to win a good amount of games this year. I have confidence in them with these changes that they've made. They've committed to this group of guys already. They've extended A.J. Brown. They extended Devontae Smith. Jordan Mailata got one. Landon Dickerson got one. Saquon Barkley just was signed on a big deal. Jalen Hurts as well. Naming all these guys, they've committed to this core group of guys. So, they're rolling with these guys. They have to find a solution to make it look better than he did. I believe that they can do it, but now really with the more experienced coordinators, I think that'll surely help them. The Cowboys are in a weird spot. The Giants aren't really competitors right now. The Commanders also have a lot of uncertain pieces. The Eagles are the best suited team to take that division. This time, I think they will do it. And then once they get into the playoffs, hopefully they're in a better spot than they were last year. I have confidence in them. It's just a matter of when all these pieces fall in line and get on the same page rather than if. I'm looking forward to seeing it. It's gonna be a very competitive NFC, but we'll continue on with this show. One of the last breaks before we finish this last show of the week, we're going to be talking about Dre Greenlaw and how he looks back on the Super Bowl and how that injury sort of changed everything, not just for him, but also for the 49ers, as well as talking about the Lions' first-round pick, Terrion Arnold, and how he revealed a very unusual way that the Raiders decided on their draft pick at the number 13 spot. Stick around to find out more on those topics. You're listening to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Continuing on with today's show, and the next topic that we have on hand, or actually before I talk about Dre Greenlaw and him recalling the injury in the Super Bowl one last time on today's show. I will remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, to use the tip and donations link you see on your screen. GSMCpodcast.net enables me to see your question pop up and I could read it on air, and that way I get your guys' perspective on anything I say or the topic that we have on hand on screen. It's a lot more engaging and it's a massive help for the show, so please, if you would, use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, with any of your questions or comments. But in saying that, we'll go back and talk about the 49ers and their star linebacker, Dre Greenlaw. He spoke, at least for the first time that I've seen in this offseason, about the experience in the Super Bowl, his freak injury. If you don't remember, he was just on the sidelines, sort of jumping up and down, trying to get hyped up to get back out there on the field. They have had a lot of success in that first half, stopping Patrick Mahomes, stopping Travis Kelce. He was getting himself amped up, and then you see him sort of collapse, grab the back of his calf, and you don't want to think it's an Achilles, but the way he was reacting, and then on the sidelines, he went back into the locker room. Of course, he tore his Achilles, and that really changed the momentum of this entire game because, like I mentioned, they were having success. He played 12 defensive snaps in that first half, and just to put it in perspective, he had 3 tackles in that first half. Kansas City had only had 3 first downs and 0 points up until that point in their first 3 possessions. 3 possessions also in a whole half is pretty crazy to think about for the Kansas City Chiefs especially. Travis Kelce only had 1 catch for 1 yard in that first half during that time that Dre Greenlaw was in the game. And just to put it more into perspective, after Dre Greenlaw gets hurt, of course it's not just on him to cover Travis Kelce, but after he goes out and he gets hurt, Travis Kelce finishes the entire game with 8 receptions and 92 yards. So some context there to show you how massive this loss was for Dre Greenlaw. And he talks about it, the idea of how things could have been differently if he stayed in the game. He didn't have the misfortune of tearing his Achilles. He said in an interview recently, "I think it was just the energy that I was bringing. I wouldn't necessarily say I would have stopped Travis Kelce. He would have made some good plays and had good catches, did some good things, but I know I would have made some plays out there as well." And he described his injury, said he was confused at first. He was sort of hoping that somebody just stepped on the back of his foot. He described his right leg as being kind of dead. It felt kind of dead, sort of limp in that moment. And just describing that Achilles injury, I could only imagine it's an undescribable feeling of just anxiousness and almost fear to some point because the defense is really just hitting a home run in that first half. They're stopping the Kansas City Chiefs. It's all going great. Their offense is looking good. And then he goes out. You're kind of hoping for the best and at the same time fearing for the worst at that time that you don't know the real diagnosis of it all. Unfortunately, he gets hurt, and then, the Kansas City Chiefs turn it on from then. They go on to win the Super Bowl, and it is just a gut-wrenching feeling, I'm sure, for him to know, to just have that uncertainty that we'll never know what could have happened if he stayed in the game and how maybe they could have won the Super Bowl and got revenge on the Kansas City Chiefs for beating them in their previous meeting a few years ago. There was also that story that I brought up, or not that I brought up, but I talked about leading up into the Super Bowl about the 49ers practice field and how they voiced their frustration with it and just the softness of it, of their practice field at UNLV. It was just basically one layer of sod rolled over this artificial turf field. They complained about it. Kyle Shanahan brought it up a lot. It isn't a reason really to blame it on for Dre Greenlaw, tearing his Achilles. Not to say that it could have happened to everyone, but that is something that is worth pointing out because a lot of players criticize the NFL for not having artificial turf surfaces in some stadiums. They all want to play on natural grass. Obviously, it's better for their joints and just for them landing, making cuts and stuff like that. It all benefits to be on natural grass. And not only is that something to keep in mind, but I think Kyle Shanahan also brought up that one of his assistant coaches, while jumping on the sidelines as well, that he also tore his Achilles. So very rare that you see both two people tear their Achilles just jumping up and down on this surface. But that was brought up to Dre Greenlaw, and how much did the practice field have to do with it? He said, "My right Achilles was already in pain that whole month, so I wouldn't say necessarily that the practice field was the cause of it." And you realize that, and you think, "Wow, a whole month!" Like, I didn't know Drake Greenlaw had been battling this for a whole month, but you look back, and he was dealing with this injury since Week 18 in that game that he missed to end the regular season against the Los Angeles Rams. He fought through that to play in the game against the Green Bay Packers. He had 2 crucial interceptions in that game, and also against the Detroit Lions, in which he played. They had a great defensive performance there in the second half to stifle the Detroit Lions offense. And you can see how important he is to this defense and how crucial he was in their playoff run. To have him not there, again, just shows, and it will always leave people wondering what could have been if he stayed in the game. And now he's going through all the rehab. He's 3 months into this rehab process to try and get back to playing football. He isn't expected back until mid-October. That is the sort of anticipated timeline for Drake Greenlaw to get back out there. Recently, General Manager John Lynch said he expects Greenlaw to start the season on the physically unable to perform list, so that would just mean that he would miss the first 4 games. If he is placed on the PUP list to start the year, he would have to miss a minimum of 4 games. How he heals and how his body adjusts, maybe he comes back sooner. That is a decision that they have to take, not soon, but before the season starts. So it'll all depend on Drake Greenlaw to see how his body recovers throughout this whole process. And just on that topic, expecting him to come back, I think the 49ers are talented enough to get by without him. They don't, not to say that they don't need him, because they would love to have him out there, but they have a lot of playmakers on the defensive side of the ball. Fred Warner's out there, Travarius Ward as well. Javon Hargrave, another underrated defensive lineman for them. I think they'll do just fine to get by with him. They're not going to lose all these games. They might have some hiccups or be in closer games, but they can get by with Drake Greenlaw. And once he's back out there, they're going to continue this dominant stamp that they have on their entire NFC. I still expect them to be there in the end, but it is interesting to see these comments by Drake Greenlaw and just get his perspective on how he's feeling, and not only that, but also see how he feels about the Super Bowl, how much he thinks about it. That's also something he brought up. He said it goes as far as thinking back to the Super Bowl and sometimes shedding one tear or another on just that what if. It's killing him. I'm sure it's killing the rest of the 49ers to see Drake Greenlaw not be able to play. But I think this coming year, with barring any surprises with Brandon Aiyuk or Deebo Samuel, I expect them again to be playing in January for a chance to go back to the Super Bowl. Wouldn't it be something if they made the Super Bowl again with the Kansas City Chiefs trying to three-peat? I think that would be cool, but again, a long time from that period, from that expected maybe another Super Bowl rematch. And in the meantime, we'll continue on with the rest of the show. One more topic coming up after this last break. Terrion Arnold, the first-round selection by the Detroit Lions, revealed recently in an interview how a coin toss really was the deciding factor in the Las Vegas Raiders' decision to draft Brock Bowers at 13. Then obviously Terrion Arnold goes later. Find out more on what he said and just my thoughts on it after the break. That is coming up in a few seconds. Don't go anywhere. thank you for joining me for this last segment of today's show. And jumping straight into it, a coin toss. Talking about this was pretty odd to just look at how this all broke down. To give more context and just tell you guys what the heck I'm talking about, the Las Vegas Raiders had a lot of areas obviously to address in the NFL draft. Defensive back, O-line, linebacker, running back, quarterback, obviously. They got the short end of the stick in the quarterback roulette that was going on in the first round. Tight end wasn't really the major area of emphasis, at least that I would have pointed to, but they ended up drafting Brock Bowers because best player available. I thought he was going to go in the top 10. To be there at 13, it seemed like a no-brainer. So at the time, I didn't hate it. I actually liked the draft pick. But Terrell Arnold on the other end of the stick, I thought this was the range where he was supposed to go. He goes in the mid-20s, which is an absolute steal to the Detroit Lions. And there was more behind the story, obviously. According to Terrell Arnold, he had to wait until, like I mentioned there, pick number 28 to be selected. And he revealed in a recent interview that he actually got a call from the Las Vegas Raiders afterwards, and he didn't say specifically who, but I think he said a coach, and this is what he had to say on that. He said, "The Lions knew that the Raiders were a possibility, and actually, the Raiders coach, they called me after the draft, and they were like, we actually had a coin toss between you and Brock Bowers. It landed on him, and I was like, oh, wow." That is just the, in layman's terms, the simplest reaction to that. First, for Terrell Arnold to just say, oh, wow, that you guys didn't pick me because of a coin toss, that is just one of the tamest reactions I probably would have had to know that a team could have drafted me earlier, but they decided on a coin toss to draft the other guy instead of me. If you remember, the Las Vegas Raiders general manager Tom Telesco claimed that drafting Brock Bowers was evaluated as a consensus decision. He was the consensus guy that they wanted to draft. And also, after all of this was said, after all this, went out into the public, the Las Vegas Raiders assistant general manager Champ Kelly also kind of held off on these accusations, I guess, from Terrell Arnold. And he said, yeah, I can't confirm that at all. Terrell is a good player. I'm excited to watch his career and watch him play. But also he said that, and he really didn't say no. He simply said that, he can't confirm it. That's not a real no to me. How hard could it have been to say, yeah, that never happened. Really a coin toss. We're not going to decide on who we're drafting on a coin toss. He could have easily said that, but instead he said that he can't confirm it. So it does leave the door open there a little bit for me. Recently, today I want to say, or yesterday on Thursday, head coach Antonio Pierce said via ESPN that that coin toss never happened. Again, similarly to Tom Telesco, he said that Brock Bowers was the guy that everybody agreed on. And he even went as far to say that the phone call never happened between him and Terrell Arnold. Now, that's not also to say that it couldn't have happened with another coach. I don't want to sit up here and call Terrell Arnold a liar. There's two sides of this story. Antonio Pierce says that the call never happened, at least with him. So it still could have happened. But I'm also not totally ignorant to the fact that this could just be simply a figure of speech, a coin toss. That decision was a coin toss, just as a figure of speech. He could have meant it not as literal as it sounds, but, I want to believe this. At the end of the day, nobody ever really knows what happens behind the scenes in these draft rooms. You don't want to believe that some of these major decisions, of course, we have to wait to see how both Brock Bowers and Terrell Arnold's careers kind of play out. That's a long time away, but a lot of people just don't want to think that these decisions come to some of these methods that these teams resort to. Nobody knows what goes on back there, the kind of conversations, the kind of decisions that these guys have to make. why not could it not be a coin toss? I don't think that's impossible to think. It doesn't have to be the final yes or no, but you flip a coin, and if it lands heads on Brock Bowers, tails on Terrion Arnold, sometimes people just can't come to a decision, and they resort to some of these methods. I certainly have done it. I'm not making draft picks, but I just think it's a little bit in human nature. Some people just can't make a decision, so they have to resort to some of these things. But now, in all seriousness, really this whole story, this whole idea of a coin toss and how tight this decision might have been for the Las Vegas Raiders, it makes you think, did they make the right decision? Obviously, you can't make that right now. Let's wait until, August to at least start talking about this. But really, you have to see how it all plays out, how these guys' careers play out. I like both players. In the moment that they both were selected, I thought I was really left impressed by the Raiders taking a mini gamble on Brock Bowers, adding him to Michael Mayer, who they drafted pretty early last year in the draft. I want to say second round. And then you add him to Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers. You don't have a quarterback, but they seem content with going into the quarterback the season with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. With the sort of talent that they have, it's not the worst idea. It's definitely not ideal, but adding the talent that is Brock Bowers, I think that's really not going to be looked upon as a bad decision in the moment. And Terrion Arnold as well. I really like the Lions trading up a few spots to go and get him and addressing their biggest need. So right now, I'm really a fan of both of them. It's not like I hated either pick, but how their careers play out, if Terrion Arnold goes on to be an all-pro, multiple Pro Bowl, Super Bowl winner, you can look back on this and think, wow, like the Raiders could have drafted him way earlier than he did, and instead they chose Brock Bowers. And if Brock Bowers goes on to have a great career, I don't think the Las Vegas Raiders fans will be too upset by this. And so it's just really a wait and see sort of game right now. Overall, I think both picks were great. Good for the Lions to wait and take that risk and sort of wait for their top rated guy on their draft board to fall to them miraculously at 24. They got a good deal out of it. Brock Bowers also is a great player for the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm excited to see both of them play. I think they can bring a lot to both of these teams. Excitement, addressing a need for both of them. The Raiders needed some more splash, some more flashy players that could bring more people in to watch them play. Complement whoever they have at quarterback. Brock Bowers can certainly do that with Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, their offensive line that's gotten better. Now, how it all plays out, we have to see. And also the Lions benefited by adding Terrion Arnold, addressing and solidifying their defense, because last year it was pretty good, and now you bring in a guy like Terrion Arnold. I think it's going to take it to that next level. Both of them have different expectations going into this season, but overall, I think it'll be a positive for both of these teams. I like both of the players. I like both of the picks. That's my feeling on it, but man, a coin toss, I wouldn't be surprised if later, of 10 years, 8 years from now, it turns out that this could have been more true than a lot of people want to think right now, but who knows and how that'll all play out. And in saying that, that'll be the last thing we talk about on this show and for the week. I want to thank you guys for joining me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show and to the channel as well. And also following all the social medias out there from Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel on YouTube for YouTube Shorts that I post weekdays, as well as all the full live recorded shows that are all on both channels and individual recorded segment videos. If you don't have time to watch a whole live show, you can go on there and watch a specific segment. As a reminder, tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL and football conversations with me, your host, Manny Maradiaga. Thanking you guys once again for joining me. Hope you guys all have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys all back here again on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.